as far as adding more data to your registration, you can add some personally identifiable information to your registration, the email address and the first name and the last name. And it's really helpful if you want to export a registration report from SCORM Cloud, so you can know which learner that registration belongs to, because that learner metadata, it lives alongside the learner ID. So you can know who that is without like a lookup table. But like Nolan was saying, like if learner privacy is at the core of your business or the core of your product, you can keep that learner data in your application and just reference it with a learner ID. That's just a benefit of only needing the IT to create the registration. You don't have to provide the name and the email. But if you do, we've seen this already, like in SCORM Cloud, you can see the learner name. And if you export the report, like that'll be available to you as well. Also, as part of the registration creation process, you can provide a postback URL that will tell SCORM Cloud to send data about the registration to your endpoint, this endpoint that you're specifying here, whenever the registration is updated. Like while the user is taking the course, the player is sending updates to SCORM Cloud, and the SCORM Cloud can pass the latest data onto your application. That just allows you to store this up-to-date data without manually fetching it from SCORM Cloud yourself. But it does require your application to have this endpoint set up to accept data from SCORM Cloud. And the next slide here is just going to show you like what kind of data you can expect from SCORM Cloud. It's like it's going to send you a post request, and it's going to look something like this, showing your registration data. And then I wanted to stop here for a moment and make an important note about registration level configuration. What we're looking at here is the hierarchy in SCORM Cloud. We have the application level as the highest, and then you have the course level underneath that, and then the registration level. The lowest level at which you make a setting is a setting that will be applied. So if you set this postback URL at the registration level, it's going to override those that set at the course and application level. You can see here that all three levels have postback URL set, but the one that the registration is going to be using is the one that's at the registration level. But if you don't add a postback URL at the registration level, but you have one at the course level, the registration will use the one at the course level. And then similarly, in this example, the registration doesn't have a postback URL. The course doesn't have a postback URL. It's only the application that has the postback URL. So the registration postback data will be sent to the URL at the application level. And we encourage people to set it at the highest level that makes sense for them, because if your endpoint changes, you only have to change it at that one place or those couple of places if it's the course level, instead of if you did it at the registration level, you'd have to change all of your registrations to use the new endpoint. I'm going to pass it back to Nolan to double down with an example.
Yeah, so we're really going to hammer it home, and we're running low on time, so I'm going to try to move through this relatively quickly. But just as a quick example, let's say you have a postback URL configured at the application level to go to foo.com/postback endpoint. And in your application in SCORM Cloud, you have two courses. Course 1 also has a postback URL configured, and 2 registrations with no postback configured. And course 2 doesn't have a postback configured, but one of the registrations is. So, yeah, if you were to launch course or registration 1, because registration doesn't have a postback URL, it's going to take the value from course 1. Registration 2, it's the same deal. It also doesn't have a postback URL. So again, it's going to look up the chain, up the hierarchy, and it's going to use that setting value at course 1. For Reg 3, it does have a registration level configuration, so no need to look up the chain. It's just going to use that, and all of the updates for registration 3 are going to be sent to example.com/postback endpoint. And finally, for registration 4, There's nothing set on the registration. There's nothing set on the course. So it's going to go ahead and look up the chain and use that application level configuration. And yeah, like Nick said, this is true for any configurations you have in SCORM Cloud. It's not just for postback URLs. If you want courses to launch in a new window or stay embedded in a frame, that would be another one. And so registration level configurations are really useful for playing around with settings, making sure it plays and looks right. And then once you're happy with settings, and there's a whole host of configuration settings in our documentation, once you're happy with it, then you migrate it up the chain and apply it to the application level so that it's broadly just affecting all of your courses. But doing changes or playing around with configurations is better to do it on the registration level, so you're not changing the behavior of all the learners that are launching content currently. Yeah, oh, sorry, this is totally my slide. Yeah, so registration launch links. So yeah, again, just to add a little more detail, like we showed before, you can include postback URL. When you're creating custom registration, so like Nick mentioned, you can include some more learner information if you'd like. You can also include a postback URL that'll create a registration level configuration, which may or may not be what you want to do, but you certainly can. On the next slide, when you build the launch link, this redirect and exit URL is really important. This is where the player is going to send the learner when they exit. If you are embedding content in an iframe, this becomes really important because the redirect on exit URL is how you're going to relinquish control of that cross origin frame. So that frame inside embedded on your page is actually pointed at cloud.scorm.com. Your parent page is your domain, so the browser is not going to allow you to talk or interact with it, that cross origin frame. So the redirect on exit URL is a way to get this frame back onto your domain, and then wherever you redirect might tell the parent page like, hey, they exited, you're all set to redirect them back to their course library or send them to a results page where you might pull the status or read that postback that just came in and show them, good job, you completed it, you passed, you got 100, or you failed, here's a button to try again. So just very flexible with the API. Another thing you can pass in on the launch link is custom CSS. So if you're embedding content, most of the time the player is not going to have any UI elements. We want to be as seamless as possible. We don't want your learners coming to our support line. We want it to look like it's just built in natively to your platform. So there's normally not any UI, but in some cases you might have content that doesn't have a dedicated exit button, or you may have multi-SCO content that doesn't really have a great way to navigate in between those different activities. So you can, in the package properties editor, you can turn on, show finish button or show navigation, and there's some UI elements that get added. And this is just an example of what it looks like by default with that exit button and the course title in the title bar. Of course, we want it to match your theme and brand. So if you want to provide custom style sheets, you can do that. And this is you could configure this as an application configuration. You can also pass it in on a launch link if you want to change the style of it depending on maybe the learner's environment. Maybe on mobile, you launch it with a different style sheet than when they're launching in a more normal browser. Launch links also have an expiry. So for security reasons, you should be prepared to create a new launch link and make that request to build registration launch link every single time that the learner is ready to launch back into that content. So no, you cannot just create a registration and then create a permanent link for it and store that in your database. When you're building an API integration, we're trusting that you've already authenticated this learner and the learner you're providing this link to is who they say they are. And we want to help and try to prevent that learner from taking a launch link and sending it to their friend to go take their training for them. So that's why they're very short expiry. And really all this means is like, as soon as you get the link and the learner renders that link, it's going to load a launch page and it's going to quickly redirect into the content. So you don't need a large window. 60 seconds is plenty of time for that to happen most of the time. Another thing you can pass on launch links, and this is a little specific, but courses, maybe you want to pass custom launch data. Maybe the course is smart enough to be able to change dynamically at launch time, depending on what information you're passing in. So you can pass additional values, and these show up as key value pairs, query parameters on the URL of the first piece of content that gets loaded. So if your course is smart enough, let's say you have a course that, you know, it can train the learner on 50 different proficiencies, but for this specific learner, you want to focus on these 10, you might pass something in the additional values to tell the course, you know, hey, focus on these areas. And if the course is programmed to do so, it can change dynamically to tailor that experience to the specific learner at launch time. So we have a quick example of this that Nick will show off, but the course that Nick showed earlier, you can actually pass in a storm type. So you could pass a blizzard if you want to train them on blizzard preparedness. On the next slide, you could instead pass hurricane as an additional value for the storm type. And the course, as Nick will show, it'll dynamically change the content of the course based on that value. So